Hi, welcome to the course. Today, we will continue our discussion on Fanon's text, focusing on Towards the African Revolution, which is a book published few years after his death that includes political text he had written from 1952 to 1961. The North African Syndrome was an essay published while he was a medical student, and the West Indians and Africans was published in 1956. Before I start presenting the text, I would like to inform you that Thursday's class is canceled because of schedule conflict, and the office hours are canceled too. I also would like to tell you that the essay you have to submit, although it is not an research paper, you can use the additional resources I published in CourseLink. You can use them as secondary sources to give a context in the introduction or to open your conclusion. But of course, you are evaluated on the engagement with the required course readings. Even my lectures are just secondary resources. It's really your relationship with the readings that I evaluate. So let's start with the North African Syndrome. We are talking about France in the 50s, therefore colonial France. France is the mainland of an empire. And during that time, we had immigrants coming from North Africa, from Tunisia or from Algeria. And they were living in poverty. They chose to leave their country because these colonial countries didn't treat well the colonized, and they thought that France would be better for employment. But Fanon noticed that there was a phenomenon in France that medical doctors called North African Syndrome, which is a term they use to describe the pain that the North African immigrants suffer. It's an diffuse, unintelligible pain. The pain for the medical doctors is imaginary because there is no lesion. And the subjects who suffer them, who injure them, were not able to describe it properly. They used vague words. For example, I'm dying, everywhere it's hurting, my heart seems to fluster, my head is bursting. Therefore, Fanon said because of doctors' bias towards certain social groups, like the Algerians, for example, and because they had this individualistic perspective when it comes to understand the cause of illness, it was impossible for them to produce an acceptable diagnosis because for Fanon, it was not imaginary. It was real. The pain is real, but the way we should try to acquire knowledge to understand this pain is not with psychogenesis and understanding individually, but with sociogeny. Understand the conditions in which the subjects are living. Therefore, you see in the text the level of integration the subjects are. We see, for example, that they don't have friends, they don't have family, they don't have significant romantic relationship. They had trouble finding a job that is able to pay their bills. They have trouble finding an appropriate housing. So this is how we can understand this North African syndrome. And we see also in the text that Fanon makes a link between the conditions in which colonized people are living in North Africa and the conditions in which immigrants are living in France. It's connected because when people witness the suffering of of immigrants, they say, if it's that hurtful to live in France, why they don't go back to their countries? To which Fanon answered, but when they were in their countries, in their school, teachers were telling them that they were French. That's how they learned their history. So their whole identity is built on this notion that they were French people. Therefore, if you tell them that they are French, why you don't treat them like French people? Why do you alienate them? Therefore, these problems call for a solution that is not individual. That means it's not about giving them medications to numb the pain. You have, according to Fanon, to treat these people with humanity, reform the medical practices. The doctors have to change their tone when they talk with the people who are going to their offices. They have to be respectful. And the whole society has to make this space livable for immigrants, build schools, build roads, build housing. Therefore, we see that how sociogeny is for Fanon in practice. It's not about the appropriate medication for individuals to numb their depression. It's about changing the society to make it more livable. Now, as I said, since I won't be there to teach you West Indians in Africans Thursday, I will just briefly present the text for you today. And it's helpful that last week, one of you talked about the hate that certain Black people nourish towards other Black people in West Indies. So I wanted to clarify that it's not hate. It's just feeling superior to other Black people. And you can see that it is what is the case for Fanon. It's not hate. In Martinique, this is a quotation from Fanon's article. In Martinique, when it is remarked that this or that person is in fact very Black, this is said without contempt, without hatred. It's not about it's not about hate. But there is a for people in West Indies, there was a difference between being an Black person coming from Africa and being a Black person born in West Indies, at least before 1939, according to Fanon. West Indians, as he said, felt they were not in the zone of non-being. They were happy. They said they were happy. They were voting like French people. They were going to schools. And to them, they were superior to Africans because they had this French culture. And so for them, they were Black, but they were not the N-word. The N-word would be used to describe the Africans. And so what they were producing at the time was culture that was very similar to the French culture. It was really an assimilated culture. The literature was similar to the French literature. But then after 1945, Fanon noticed that West Indians invoke their Blackness. And they changed their tone when they were talking to Africans. They said, okay, we are brothers. We both are Black. And therefore, they produced songs and poems dedicated to their Blackness and to Africa. And they were no longer believing that West Indians were superior to Africans. On the contrary, they were thinking that West Indians and Africans were equal, and they were all the N-word. They were all Black and all the N-word. So what happened? There is this conversion of the subjectivity. And Fanon explains that with three events. The first is the death of the father. It's because it was during the Second War and Germany occupied France. Therefore, French people, thousands of French people decided to go to West Indies because they were afraid of Germans. And for West Indian to see there to see France losing a war it was similar, according to Fanon, to watch the father dying, as we remember from last week. The father is the white man. It's the ideal self. And also, they were, because French people went to West Indies, Martinique, people from Martinique saw how racist these French people are. They were awful, and they were, because of their arrival, the economy got worse. People were starving. And then you have also an intellectual, Black intellectual, Aimé Césaire, who said, I'm Black and it's great to be Black, which is new, which is revolutionary at the time. So you have this arrival of the French people, you have people like Aimé Césaire, who valorize Blackness, and you have also, third event, the birth of the proletariat, which is not an event that Fanon described very much in that article, but I just want to mention it. So these chief factors push the West Indians to convert to a new subjectivity, and that new subjectivity embrace its Blackness. Unfortunately, yes, the West Indians decided that they have nothing to do with these racist French people. They decided to reject this white culture, white supremacy. But when they turn to Africa and say, yes, we are brothers, Fanon said that Africans were not accepting this change of heart from the West Indians. Therefore, West Indians were stuck. They were not white, they were not French, but they were not African either. So the article finished with that problem that is not solved yet at the end of the article. Therefore, to summarize what we have just said today, the analysis of North African syndrome from Fanon shows us how to practice sociogeny in real life. Last week, we talked theoretically how it is different from Lacan and Freud's, but we see in practice it involves watching how the subject is integrated in the society. Secondly, we see how problematic it is for West Indians to identify with the white man, because we see what happens to them when terrible events happen. And now they see the real face of the white man, which is a racist face. A face that said, it doesn't matter for me whether you are West Indian or African. To me, you are just a black person. So I finished presenting these two texts, and I remind you that next week we will talk about the last book that Fanon had written, which is wretched of the earth. We will start with on national culture next week, and the week after we will talk about violence. So now we will turn to the discussion. The first question I would like to ask you is, Fanon seems critical when he talks about medical doctors, although they are supposed to be scientists. It seems that they still have biases and prejudice towards certain social groups, and their diagnosis therefore is inaccurate. Do you think that it is still true today that medical doctors do not treat people the same way depending on which social groups they belong to? Thank you.